The little girl was shivering so hard her tiny shoulders shook like autumn leaves, and Arya's heart broke right there on the sidewalk outside Murphy's diner. The child couldn't have been more than 6 years old, sitting on the cold concrete steps of the closed flower shop next door, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest. Her pink coat was thin as tissue paper, no match for the bitter November wind that whipped through downtown Portland. What made it worse was the way the little girl kept looking up and down the empty street, her dark eyes wide with fear but trying so hard to be brave. Every few seconds she'd whisper something to the rabbit, like it could somehow make everything okay. The streetlight above cast harsh shadows across her small face, making her look even more lost and alone. Arya had just finished her double shift at the diner, her feet aching in her worn sneakers, her uniform smelling like coffee and grease. She was exhausted, running on 3 hours of sleep and too much caffeine, but seeing this child sitting there in the cold made everything else disappear. Without thinking, she walked over and crouched down beside the girl. "Hey there, sweetie," Arya said softly, her breath making small clouds in the cold air. "Are you okay? Are you waiting for someone?" The little girl looked up at her with the biggest brown eyes Arya had ever seen. She nodded quickly, then shook her head, then looked confused about which answer was right. "My daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. "He was crying on the phone and I got scared." Arya's heart clenched. She pulled her own jacket tighter and sat down on the step beside the child, not caring that the cold concrete would soak through her jeans. "What's your name, honey?" "Emma," the girl said, holding her rabbit closer. "This is Mr. Hoppy. He's not scared of anything." "That's a very brave rabbit," Arya said, managing a smile despite the worry eating at her. She looked around the empty street again. Where were this child's parents? How long had she been sitting here? "Emma, do you know your daddy's phone number?" Emma shook her head. "I runned away from the car. Daddy was talking to someone about how he's bad at everything and how Mommy would be mad at him. But Mommy can't be mad because she lives with the angels now." The words hit Arya like a punch to the chest. This little girl had lost her mother and now thought her father didn't want her. The whole situation was heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. Arya reached into her bag and pulled out the ham sandwich she'd saved from work, her dinner, since she couldn't afford to buy food at the diner even with her employee discount. "Are you hungry, Emma?" she asked, unwrapping the sandwich. "I've got this sandwich and I'm not really that hungry. Would you like half?" Emma's eyes went wide. "Really? For me?" "For you and Mr. Hoppy," Arya said, tearing the sandwich in half and offering the bigger piece to Emma. "But we need to figure out how to find your daddy, okay? I bet he's looking everywhere for you." As Emma took a small bite of the sandwich, her face lighting up with the first smile Arya had seen, the sound of screeching tires echoed down the street. A black Mercedes came around the corner so fast it almost hit the curb, and Arya instinctively moved closer to Emma, ready to protect her from whatever was happening. The car door slammed open before it even stopped moving, and a tall man in an expensive suit jumped out. His dark hair was messy like he'd been running his hands through it, his tie was crooked, and his face was a mask of pure panic. When he saw Emma sitting on the steps, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Emma," he cried out, his voice breaking on her name. "Oh God, Emma, I've been looking everywhere for you." "Daddy?" Emma scrambled to her feet, still holding her half of the sandwich and Mr. Hoppy, and ran straight into her father's arms. Arya watched as the man dropped to his knees on the sidewalk, wrapping his daughter in a hug so tight it was like he was afraid she might disappear again. His shoulders were shaking, and Arya realized he was crying big, silent tears that he was trying to hide from Emma. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Emma whispered against his shoulder. "I heard you on the phone and you sounded so sad and I thought maybe if I wasn't there you wouldn't be sad anymore." The man pulled back to look at his daughter, his hands cupping her small face. "Oh sweetheart, no. No, no, no. You are the best thing in my whole world. Daddy was sad about work stuff, not about you. Never about you." He looked over Emma's head at Arya, who was still sitting on the steps, feeling like she was intruding on this private moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for staying with her. I'm Jonathan Pierce and I—" He stopped, seeming to realize that Emma was holding food. "Did you give her something to eat?" Arya stood up slowly, brushing off her jeans. "Just half a sandwich. She was cold and scared and I couldn't just walk away." She looked down at Emma, who was now standing between her father's knees, still clutching Mr. Hoppy. "I'm Arya. I work at the diner over there." Jonathan Pierce looked at her like she just told him she was an angel. His eyes the same warm brown as Emma searched her face with an intensity that made Arya suddenly aware of how she must look after a 14-hour shift. Her uniform was wrinkled, her hair was falling out of its ponytail, and she probably smelled like French fry oil. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, getting to his feet but keeping one hand on Emma's shoulder. "When I realized she was gone, I've never been so scared in my life." "You don't need to thank me," Arya said quickly. Anyone would have done the same thing. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. 3 other people had walked past Emma in the 20 minutes Arya had been sitting with her, and none of them had even looked twice at a little girl sitting alone in the cold. Something in Jonathan's expression told her he knew it too. "The lady shared her dinner with me, Daddy," Emma said, holding up the remaining piece of sandwich. "And she told me that Mr. Hoppy was very brave." Jonathan looked from his daughter to Arya, and something shifted in his face. The panic was fading, replaced by something deeper and more complicated. "She did, huh? That was very kind of her." Emma nodded solemnly. "Can we take her home with us? She looks tired." "Emma," Jonathan said gently, but Arya could see him considering it for just a moment before reality kicked in. "I'm sure Arya has her own home to go to." Arya did have her own home, a tiny studio apartment with a heater that barely worked and a refrigerator that was mostly empty. But she also had boundaries, and getting involved with strangers, even kind ones with beautiful eyes and lost little girls, wasn't something she could afford to do. "I should get going," she said, picking up her bag. "I'm glad you found each other." "Wait," Jonathan said quickly. "Please. I know this sounds crazy, but could I take you to dinner sometime? As a thank you?" Arya looked at him, really looked at him. The expensive suit, the luxury car, the way he carried himself even in the middle of a crisis. Then she looked down at her uniform, thought about her empty bank account and her student loans and her 2 other part-time jobs. "That's very nice of you," she said carefully, "but you don't owe me anything. I'm just glad Emma is safe." She started to walk away, but Emma's voice stopped her. "Will you be at the diner tomorrow?" she asked. "In case I want to tell you how Mr. Hoppy liked the sandwich?" Arya turned back to see Emma looking up at her with those big brown eyes, and Jonathan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something in his face that looked almost like hope, mixed with a sadness that seemed too deep for someone so young. "I'll be there," Arya found herself saying. "I work the morning shift tomorrow." As she walked away down the empty street, she could hear Emma chattering to her father about the nice lady who shared her sandwich and wasn't afraid of the dark. Arya pulled her jacket tighter against the wind and tried not to think about the way Jonathan Pierce had looked at her, like she was something precious he was afraid to break. She also tried not to think about how good it had felt to hold Emma and make her smile, or how long it had been since anyone had looked at her like she mattered. Because getting involved with people like that, people with money and complicated lives and beautiful, broken families, was not something a waitress from Southeast Portland could afford to do. But as she walked the 6 blocks to her apartment, Arya couldn't shake the feeling that something had just changed in her life, something that couldn't be unchanged no matter how hard she tried to pretend otherwise. 3 hours earlier, Emma Pierce had been sitting in the back seat of her father's Mercedes, playing with Mr. Hoppy and humming the song her mother used to sing to her before bedtime. They were parked outside the law office building where Daddy had another meeting. There were always meetings these days, always phone calls that made him look tired and worried. Emma had learned to be very quiet during the phone calls. Daddy had explained that his work was going through a hard time, and that sometimes grown-ups had to have serious conversations about fixing things. Emma didn't really understand what needed fixing, but she knew it made Daddy sad, so she always sat very still and played quietly with Mr. Hoppy. But tonight was different. Tonight, Daddy's voice got loud and then quiet and then shaky in a way that made Emma's tummy feel funny. She heard him say words like failing, and can't do this anymore, and Sarah would be so disappointed in me. Sarah was Mommy's name, the name Emma wasn't supposed to say too much because it made Daddy's eyes go red and watery. "I can't keep this up, Michael," Daddy had said into his phone, and Emma could see his shoulders shaking in the front seat. "The company's falling apart, I haven't slept more than 3 hours in weeks, and Emma? God, I don't know how to be what she needs. Sarah was the one who knew how to do all this stuff. I'm failing at everything." Emma had felt something cold and heavy settle in her chest. Daddy thought he was failing because of her. If she wasn't there, maybe Daddy could fix his work and stop being sad all the time. Maybe he could sleep better and not have the worry lines around his eyes that made him look older than the other daddies at school. So when Daddy got out of the car to pace around while he talked, something he always did when the conversations got really serious, Emma had very carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and slipped out with Mr. Hoppy. She knew Daddy would be upset, but maybe if she wasn't there to worry about, he could figure out how to fix everything else. She had walked for what felt like a long time, until her feet got tired and the wind got cold and she realized she didn't know how to get back to find Daddy. That's when she'd sat down on the steps outside the flower shop, trying to be brave like Mommy always told her to be, but feeling scared and small and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. Now, sitting in the car again with Daddy's jacket wrapped around her and the heater running full blast, Emma watched her father's face in the rearview mirror. He kept looking back at her like he was making sure she was really there, and his hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles were white. "Emma," he said softly, "can you tell me why you left the car? I promise you won't be in trouble. I just need to understand." Emma hugged Mr. Hoppy closer and thought about how to explain. "You were crying," she said finally. "On the phone. You said you were failing at everything and that Mommy would be disappointed. I thought maybe if I wasn't there, you could fix the broken things better." Jonathan Pierce felt like someone had just knocked all the air out of his lungs. He pulled the car over into an empty parking lot and turned around to look at his daughter really look at her. She was so small in the big leather seat, wearing the pink coat that Sarah had bought her last Christmas, holding the stuffed rabbit that had been Sarah's first gift to her when she was born. "Oh, baby girl," he whispered, unbuckling his seatbelt so he could reach back and touch her face. "I wasn't crying because of you. I was crying because I'm scared I'm not good enough to take care of you the way Mommy did. But that's my worry, not yours. You are the most important thing in my whole life, and nothing is more important than you." Emma's bottom lip wobbled. "But you said you were failing at everything." "I meant work stuff," Jonathan said, trying to keep his voice calm even though his heart was breaking. "Boring grown-up stuff about money and companies and things that don't matter as much as you do. I never ever meant you, sweetheart. You are the only thing I'm doing right." It was true even if it sometimes felt like a miracle. In the years since Sarah had died, Jonathan felt like he was drowning most days. The company he'd built from the ground up was struggling, he'd lost 3 major clients in 6 months, and every decision felt like he was guessing and hoping for the best. But Emma was thriving. She was happy and healthy and smart and kind, and somehow he hadn't completely ruined that yet. "The nice lady was really pretty," Emma said suddenly, apparently satisfied with his explanation and ready to move on to more interesting topics. "And she smelled like cookies." "Why don't you smell like cookies, Daddy?" Jonathan laughed despite everything. "Because I don't work in a place that makes cookies, I guess." "What did you think of her?" "She was sad too," Emma said matter-of-factly. "But different sad than you. Your sad is like when you miss Mommy. Her sad was like when you really want something but you can't have it." The observation hit Jonathan harder than it should have. He'd only spoken to Arya for a few minutes, but Emma was right, there had been something in the young woman's eyes that spoke of dreams deferred, of wanting things that felt out of reach. The way she'd looked at his car, his suit, the distance she'd put between them when he'd offered dinner, it all painted a picture of someone who'd learned not to reach for things that seemed too good to be true. "She shared her food with me even though she looked hungry," Emma continued. "And she sat with me even though the ground was cold and yucky. I think she's lonely." "What makes you think that?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious. Emma had always been unusually perceptive for her age, something Sarah had encouraged and delighted in. "Because when I told her about Mr. Hoppy, she smiled the same way you smile when I hug you after you've had a bad day. Like she forgot to be sad for a minute." Jonathan started the car again, but his mind was still on the waitress with the kind eyes who'd shared her dinner with a lost little girl. Arya, she'd said her name was. She couldn't have been much older than 25, but there was something in the way she carried herself that suggested she'd already lived through more than most people her age. He thought about the way she'd positioned herself between Emma and his car when he'd first arrived, ready to protect a child she'd just met. The way she'd refused his offer of dinner, not with the coy hesitation of someone playing hard to get, but with the firm politeness of someone who'd learned to expect disappointment. Most of all, he thought about the way Emma had relaxed in her presence, the way his daughter had opened up to a stranger in a way she rarely did even with people they knew well. Emma had been through so much in her short life, losing her mother, adjusting to a father who was doing his best but often felt lost himself. If she trusted this woman, if she felt safe with her, that meant something. "Daddy?" Emma's voice broke into his thoughts. "Can we go see her tomorrow? At the diner? I want to tell her that Mr. Hoppy really liked the sandwich." Jonathan glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emma hugging her rabbit, her expression hopeful in a way it hadn't been for months. Ever since Sarah died, Emma had been more withdrawn, less likely to show excitement about new people or experiences. But something about Arya had gotten through to her. "Maybe we can stop by," he said carefully. "If it's okay with her." "She said she'd be there," Emma said confidently. "She promised." As they drove home through the quiet streets, Jonathan found himself thinking about promises. He'd made so many to Sarah before she died that he'd take care of Emma, that he'd keep the family business running, that he'd make sure their daughter knew how much her mother had loved her. Most days he felt like he was failing at all of them. But tonight, a stranger had made a simple promise to his daughter, and somehow that felt like hope. Maybe it was foolish to read so much into a chance encounter, but Jonathan had learned to take hope wherever he could find it. And if Emma wanted to thank the kind waitress who'd shared her sandwich, well, that seemed like the least he could do. Besides, he found himself genuinely curious about Arya. In a world where most people walked past problems that weren't their own, she'd stopped. She'd sat down on cold concrete and shared her dinner with a scared little girl, asking for nothing in return. That kind of kindness was rare, and it deserved to be acknowledged properly. As he carried a sleepy Emma into their house, the big empty house that still felt too quiet without Sarah's laughter filling it, Jonathan made a decision. Tomorrow he would take his daughter to Murphy's diner. Not to ask Arya for anything, not to try to repay her with money or gifts that might make her uncomfortable, but simply to let Emma say thank you. And maybe, if he was very lucky, he might get the chance to understand what had made a tired waitress stop everything to help a stranger's child, and why that act of kindness felt like the first real light he'd seen in a very dark year. The morning rush at Murphy's diner was always chaos, but today felt different to Arya. She kept glancing toward the door every few minutes, telling herself she wasn't really expecting to see Emma and her father, but knowing she was lying to herself. It had been almost 12 hours since she'd left them on that cold sidewalk, and she couldn't stop thinking about the little girl with the brave eyes and the man who'd looked at her like she'd just saved his whole world. "You're distracted today," said Dolores, the head waitress who'd been working at Murphy's since before Arya was born. Dolores was 63, tough as leather, and had a soft spot for Arya that she tried hard to hide. "Table 6 has been waiting for their check for 10 minutes. "Sorry," Arya said, rushing over to drop off the check and refill coffee cups. The morning crowd was the usual mix of construction workers, office people grabbing coffee before work, and regulars who came in every day and always ordered the same thing. She knew most of their names and their usual orders by heart, but today her mind kept wandering. She was wiping down tables after the breakfast rush when the bell above the door chimed, and Arya looked up to see Emma bouncing through the entrance, holding Mr. Hoppy in one hand and tugging her father along with the other. Jonathan Pierce looked different in the daylight, younger somehow, less severe. He was wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater instead of the expensive suit from last night, and his dark hair was still slightly messy, like he'd let Emma help him get ready. "There she is," Emma announced loudly enough that half the diner turned to look. "Daddy, that's the nice lady." "Arya." Arya felt her cheeks heat up as every customer in the place turned to stare at her, then at the well-dressed man and little girl who were clearly not their usual clientele. Murphy's diner wasn't the kind of place that attracted people who drove cars that cost more than most people made in a year. "Emma," Jonathan said quietly, "remember what we talked about in the car?" Indoor voice. "Sorry," Emma whispered, though she was still practically vibrating with excitement. She ran straight to Arya, who was standing frozen by table 12 with a dish rag in her hand. "We came to tell you that Mr. Hoppy really liked the sandwich. And Daddy wanted to say thank you properly." Arya looked over Emma's head at Jonathan, who was approaching more slowly, his expression unreadable. "You didn't need to come all the way here," she said. "Really, it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," Jonathan said firmly. "What you did last night? Emma could have been out there for hours. It was getting colder and she was scared and you stopped. You shared your dinner with her and kept her safe until I found her. That's not nothing." Dolores had appeared at Arya's elbow, her sharp eyes taking in the expensive clothes and the way other customers were starting to whisper. "Everything okay over here, honey?" "These are the people I told you about," Arya said quickly. "From last night. This is Emma and her father, Jonathan Pierce. Mr. Pierce, this is Dolores. She basically runs this place." Jonathan extended his hand to Dolores with a smile that Arya could tell was genuine. "It's very nice to meet you. You should know that you have an extraordinary employee here. Arya went above and beyond to help my daughter last night." Dolores shook his hand but kept her expression neutral. She'd seen plenty of rich men come through here over the years, and most of them treated the staff like they were invisible. "Arya's good people," she said simply. "Best worker I've got. Can we sit at Arya's table?" Emma asked, looking around the diner with wide eyes. "This place smells amazing. Like pancakes and coffee and—" She sniffed dramatically. "Bacon." "Emma, I don't think we should take up Arya's time during work," Jonathan started, but Arya found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "It's okay," she said. "The morning rush is over. I can seat you a table for it's in my section. She led them to a booth by the window, automatically grabbing menus and coffee cups from the counter as they walked. It was a routine she'd done thousands of times, but having Jonathan Pierce sitting in her section felt surreal. She poured coffee for him and orange juice for Emma, her hands surprisingly steady. So, she said, pulling out her order pad even though she felt ridiculous doing it, what can I get you folks this morning? Pancakes, Emma said immediately. With lots of syrup and maybe some berries if you have them. We have strawberries and blueberries, Arya said, smiling at Emma's enthusiasm. What about you, Mr. Pierce? Jonathan, please, he said, looking at the menu but glancing up at her frequently. And just coffee is fine for me. Just coffee? Arya raised an eyebrow. This is a diner, not a coffee shop. The pancakes Emma ordered are really good, and the eggs Benedict is Dolores' specialty. You sound like you're trying to talk me into spending more money, Jonathan said, and for a moment Arya was afraid she'd offended him. Then she saw the teasing smile at the corner of his mouth and realized he was joking. Old habit, she said with a laugh. But seriously, the food here is really good. People think because it's a diner it must be greasy or cheap, but Murphy the owner, he really cares about the quality. In that case, Jonathan said, closing the menu, I'll have the eggs Benedict. And maybe some of those famous pancakes Emma's getting. We can share. As Arya walked back to the kitchen to place their order, she could hear Emma chattering to her father about the different pictures on the walls and asking if they could come back tomorrow too. There was something so normal about it, so comfortable, that it made her chest feel tight with longing for something she couldn't quite name. That's quite a catch, Dolores said under her breath as Arya clipped the order to the wheel. It's not like that, Arya said quickly. He's just being nice because I helped his daughter last night. Dolores said, clearly not believing her. And I suppose it's just coincidence that he's been watching you walk around this place like you're the most interesting thing he's ever seen. Arya glanced back at table 4 and found Jonathan looking directly at her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away immediately like most people would. Instead, he smiled a real smile that reached his eyes and made something flutter in her stomach. He's probably just making sure I'm not going to drop their food, she muttered, but Dolores just snorted. Honey, I've been working in diners since before you were born. I know the difference between a man checking on his order and a man who's interested. That one's interested. Arya wanted to argue, but something about the way Jonathan had said her name, the way he'd insisted on coming here to thank her properly, made her think maybe Dolores wasn't completely wrong. But it didn't matter if he was interested. People like Jonathan Pierce didn't get involved with people like her waitresses who lived paycheck to paycheck and had student loan debt and worked 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. When she brought their food out, Emma clapped her hands together like it was the most exciting meal she'd ever seen. It looks so pretty. Daddy, look at the strawberries. It looks delicious, Jonathan agreed, and when Arya set his plate down, his fingers brushed against hers for just a second. It was probably an accident, but the touch sent a little jolt through her that she tried hard to ignore. Is there anything else you need? She asked, falling back on professional politeness. Actually, Jonathan said, I was hoping we could talk for a minute. When you have time, I mean. I know you're working. Arya glanced around the diner. It was Thursday morning, which was always slow after the breakfast rush. Only 3 other tables were occupied, and Dolores was handling them. I have a few minutes, she said carefully. Great. Jonathan cut off a piece of his eggs Benedict and took a bite, his eyebrows going up in surprise. Wow, you weren't kidding about the quality. This is excellent. Murphy used to work at some fancy hotel in San Francisco, Arya said, sliding into the booth across from them. He moved here 15 years ago and opened this place. Sometimes I think he's a little overqualified for a neighborhood diner, but he says he likes the community feel. I can see why, Jonathan said, looking around the diner with new appreciation. It feels real. Honest. Emma was carefully cutting her pancakes into perfect squares, arranging the strawberries in a pattern that made sense only to her. Arya, she said without looking up from her art project, what's your favorite thing about working here? It was such an unexpected question from a 6-year-old that Arya had to think about it for a moment. I guess. I like the people, she said finally. I know that sounds silly, but I like taking care of people. Making sure they have good food and feel welcome. Even if it's just for an hour while they eat breakfast, I like being part of making their day a little better. Jonathan was watching her with that intense look again, like he was trying to figure out some complicated puzzle. That's not silly at all, he said quietly. That's actually really beautiful. Arya felt her cheeks heat up again. What about you? What do you do for work? I run a consulting company, Jonathan said. We help other businesses solve problems and run more efficiently. It's not nearly as interesting as what you do. Daddy helps people too, Emma said, looking up from her pancake arrangement. He fixes broken companies so people don't lose their jobs. Is that what you were talking about on the phone last night? Arya asked gently. Work problems? Jonathan's expression darkened slightly. Things have been challenging lately. I've been so focused on keeping the business running that I haven't been as present for Emma as I should be. Last night was a wake-up call. But you found her, Arya said. You came looking for her right away. That's what matters. Because of you, Jonathan said firmly. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't stopped to help her. He shook his head. I don't want to think about what could have happened. But I was there, Arya said simply. And nothing bad happened. Emma is safe and happy and eating pancakes that she's turned into art. Emma giggled. They're supposed to be flowers. See? The strawberries are the petals and the blueberries are the middle parts. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Arya said and meant it. There was something about Emma's joy in simple things that made the world feel brighter. Arya, Jonathan said suddenly, would you like to have dinner with us sometime? Not at a restaurant, he added quickly, seeing her expression. At our house. Emma's been asking if she could cook for you, well, if she could help me cook for you. She wants to return the favor of sharing a meal. Arya looked from Jonathan to Emma, who was watching her with hopeful eyes. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a bad idea, that getting involved with them would only lead to heartbreak when they inevitably moved on with their lives. But the hopeful look on Emma's face and the genuine warmth in Jonathan's invitation made it impossible to say no. I'd like that, she heard herself saying. But only if you let me bring dessert. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really? You'll really come have dinner at our house? Really? Arya said and realized she meant it. Whatever happened, whatever complications might arise, she wanted to see Emma's flour pancakes and hear more of her stories about Mr. Hoppy. She wanted to sit at a real dinner table and feel like part of a family, even if it was just for one evening. How about Saturday? Jonathan asked. Around 6. I work until 5 on Saturday, Arya said, but I could be there by 6:30. Perfect, Jonathan said, and his smile was so bright it made Arya's heart skip. Emma, what do you think we should make for Arya? As Emma launched into an elaborate plan involving spaghetti and meatballs and garlic bread, Arya found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, some chances were worth taking. Even if they scared her. Especially if they scared her. Because looking at Jonathan and Emma, seeing the way they cared for each other and the easy way they'd included her in their conversation, Arya was starting to think that some things were worth being brave for. Saturday evening found Arya standing in front of a beautiful 2-story house in the West Hills, holding a chocolate cake she'd spent her entire afternoon making and feeling completely out of place. The house was exactly what she'd expected, elegant but not flashy, with a well-maintained yard and flower boxes under the windows that spoke of money without showing off about it. She'd changed clothes 3 times before settling on a simple blue dress that was nice enough for dinner but not so fancy that it looked like she was trying too hard. Now, standing on the front porch with her carefully made cake, she wondered if she'd made a mistake coming here at all. Before she could lose her nerve completely, the front door swung open and Emma appeared, wearing a bright yellow dress and an apron that was clearly too big for her. Arya, you came. You came. Emma bounced on her toes, then grabbed Arya's free hand and pulled her into the house. Come see what we made. Daddy let me help with everything and I only dropped 1 meatball on the floor and we gave it to our neighbor's dog so it didn't go to waste. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the smell of garlic and tomatoes and something indefinably homey that made Arya's chest feel tight. It wasn't what she'd expected from a millionaire's home. There were finger paintings on the refrigerator, books scattered on coffee tables, and family photos everywhere that showed Jonathan and Emma with a beautiful woman who must have been Emma's mother. Arya, welcome. Jonathan appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, and there was something about the way he smiled when he saw her that made her feel like she belonged here. I brought dessert, Arya said, holding up the cake. Chocolate with vanilla buttercream. I wasn't sure what Emma liked. I love chocolate, Emma announced. And vanilla. And cake. This is the best day ever. Jonathan laughed, reaching out to take the cake from Arya. You really didn't need to go to so much trouble, but this looks incredible. Did you make this yourself? I like to bake, Arya said, following them toward the kitchen. It relaxes me. The kitchen was gorgeous: granite counters, stainless steel appliances, and a big island in the center where Emma had clearly been working. There was flour on the counter, sauce splattered on the stove, and the kind of comfortable mess that spoke of actual cooking rather than just reheating expensive takeout. Emma was my sous chef today, Jonathan said, stirring a pot of sauce. She made the salad all by herself and helped roll the meatballs. They're mostly round, Emma said proudly, pointing to a plate of meatballs that were indeed mostly round. Some of them look like eggs, but Daddy said that's okay because they'll taste the same. They look perfect, Arya said, and meant it. There was something so sweet about the obvious effort they'd both put into making dinner special for her. Would you like some wine? Jonathan asked. I opened a bottle of Chianti, but I also have soda or juice if you prefer. Wine sounds nice, Arya said, trying not to notice how domestic this all felt. Like she belonged in this kitchen, helping with dinner and watching Emma arrange napkins on the dining room table with serious concentration. Jonathan poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Arya, their fingers brushing again in that way that seemed to happen every time they were near each other. To new friends, he said, raising his glass. To new friends, Arya agreed, clinking her glass against his and trying to ignore the way his eyes lingered on her face. Dinner was surprisingly easy. Emma kept up a steady stream of chatter about school and her friends and a book she was reading about a girl who could talk to animals. Jonathan asked Arya questions about her work and her life that felt genuinely curious rather than polite conversation, and Arya found herself talking more than she usually did with people she'd just met. So you're taking classes at the community college? Jonathan asked as they finished the main course. What are you studying? Business administration, Arya said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. I know it sounds boring, but I've always wanted to open my own restaurant someday. Murphy's is great, but I'd love to have a place where I could create my own menu, maybe focus on healthy comfort food. That doesn't sound boring at all, Jonathan said. It sounds like you have a real vision for what you want to do. It's probably just a pipe dream, Arya said quickly, uncomfortable with the way he was looking at her like he thought her dreams were not only possible but valuable. It takes a lot of money to open a restaurant, and I'm still paying off student loans from my first 2 years of college. What happened? Emma asked, her fork halfway to her mouth. Why did you stop going to college? Emma, Jonathan said gently, that might be personal. It's okay, Arya said, though it wasn't a story she usually told. My mom got sick when I was 20. Cancer. I had to drop out to take care of her and help pay for her medical bills. Emma's eyes went wide. Like my mommy? The question hung in the air for a moment, and Arya saw Jonathan's expression tighten with old pain. Yes, sweetheart, Arya said gently. Like your mommy. Did your mommy go live with the angels too? Emma asked in a small voice. Yes, Arya said softly. About 2 years ago. Emma put down her fork and came around the table to give Arya a hug that was so fierce and unexpected it brought tears to her eyes. I'm sorry your mommy had to go to heaven, Emma whispered against her shoulder. But I bet she's proud of you for taking care of her. Thank you, sweetheart, Arya managed, hugging Emma back and catching Jonathan's eye over his daughter's head. The understanding she saw there was almost overwhelming. He knew exactly what she'd been through, the helpless watching and the grief and the way everything else in life had to be put on hold. That's why you want to help people feel better with food, Emma said suddenly, pulling back from the hug with the kind of insight that sometimes surprised adults. Because taking care of people makes you feel better too. Arya stared at this 6-year-old who had just summed up something she'd never been able to articulate herself. You're very smart, Emma. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly, making both adults laugh. Daddy tells me that all the time. Can we have cake now? The rest of the evening passed in a warm blur of chocolate cake and stories and Emma showing Arya her room, which was painted purple and had glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. They read 2 chapters of Emma's animal book together while Jonathan cleaned up the kitchen, and Arya found herself thinking that this felt more like home than anywhere she'd been since her mother died. When it was time for Emma's bath and bed, Jonathan walked Arya to her car while Emma waved from the upstairs window. Thank you for coming tonight, he said, leaning against her car door. Emma hasn't been this excited about anything in months. You're really good with her. She's an amazing kid, Arya said. You should be proud. I am, Jonathan said, then paused. Arya, I know this might be forward, but would you like to do this again? Maybe not dinner at the house, but something. Emma's been asking if we can take you to the zoo next weekend. Arya looked up at the house, where Emma was still visible in the window, and felt something shift in her chest. These people were becoming important to her in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. I'd like that, she said finally. But Jonathan, I need you to know that I'm not. I don't usually get involved with people from such a different world than mine. Different how? He asked, stepping a little closer. You know how, Arya said, gesturing at the house, his car, everything that represented the gap between their lives. You're successful and wealthy, and I'm a waitress who lives in a studio apartment and eats ramen more often than I care to admit. You're also kind and smart, and you make my daughter laugh in a way she hasn't since her mother died, Jonathan said quietly. You bake chocolate cakes from scratch and you read bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters. If you think those things matter less than money, then you're wrong. Arya felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had seen her as more than just the girl who brought their coffee? The zoo sounds great, she said finally. But I pay for my own ticket. Jonathan smiled. Deal. But I'm buying the cotton candy. As Arya drove home through the quiet streets, she found herself thinking about the family photos on Jonathan's mantle. She'd noticed that he still wore his wedding ring, that his face had gone soft and sad when Emma mentioned her mother. He was still grieving, still healing, just like she was. Maybe that was okay. Maybe two broken people could help each other heal without expecting either of them to be perfect or whole or ready for something they weren't sure they could handle. Maybe sometimes the best relationships were built on understanding rather than passion, on shared loss rather than shared dreams. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what they both needed. The Oregon Zoo on a crisp October Saturday was exactly what Arya had expected, crowded with families, full of children's laughter, and surprisingly fun for three people who were still figuring out what they meant to each other. Emma had insisted on seeing the elephants first, then the penguins, then back to the elephants because she wanted to make sure they remembered her. I think they definitely remember you, Arya said, watching Emma wave enthusiastically at an elephant who was completely ignoring her. You've only introduced yourself 4 times. 5 times, Emma corrected. But the big one wasn't paying attention the second time, so I had to do it again. Jonathan was carrying a bag full of zoo souvenirs that Emma had convinced him were absolutely necessary: a stuffed penguin, a book about elephants, and a t-shirt with a giraffe on it that she insisted was for Arya, even though Arya had protested that she couldn't accept gifts. It's not a gift, Emma had explained patiently. It's a friendship shirt. Friends give each other friendship shirts. Daddy told me so. Arya had looked at Jonathan, who'd shrugged with a smile that suggested he'd been manipulated by his 6-year-old and didn't mind a bit. Now they were sitting on a bench near the sea lion exhibit, sharing a bag of overpriced zoo popcorn and watching Emma try to convince a sea lion to come closer to the glass. She's persistent, Arya observed as Emma pressed her face against the viewing window and made what she apparently thought were sea lion noises. That's one word for it, Jonathan said with a laugh. Sarah used to say Emma could convince a fish to walk on land if she set her mind to it. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife naturally, without the careful sadness that usually accompanied any reference to Emma's mother. Arya glanced at him and saw that he was smiling, watching his daughter with the kind of love that made her chest feel warm and tight. Tell me about her, Arya said quietly. Sarah. If you want to. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, and Arya thought maybe she'd pushed too far. Then he started talking, his voice soft and full of memory. She was a teacher, he said. 3rd grade. She used to say that 8-year-olds were the perfect age because they were old enough to have real conversations but young enough to still believe in magic. He paused, watching Emma, who had given up on the sea lions and was now trying to feed popcorn to a seagull. She would have loved watching Emma today. Sarah always said the zoo was the best place. To remember that the world was full of wonderful things. She sounds amazing, Arya said, and meant it. She was, Jonathan said simply. She was diagnosed when Emma was 4. Breast cancer. We thought we caught it early, thought we had it beat. But it came back more aggressive the second time and... He shrugged, the gesture trying to encompass something too big for words. I'm sorry, Arya said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. The hardest part wasn't losing her, Jonathan said, his voice barely audible. The hardest part was watching Emma lose her. Sarah was... She was the center of our family. The one who remembered to take pictures and plan birthday parties and make sure we had traditions. I was always the serious one, focused on work, making sure we had financial security. Sarah made sure we had everything else. Arya understood. She'd been the serious one too, focused on practical things like paying bills and managing medications, while her mother had been the one who insisted they watch silly movies together and paint each other's nails even when she was too tired to sit up for long. Emma seems happy, Arya said. You're doing better than you think you are. Some days, Jonathan said. Other days I feel like I'm drowning and just trying to keep her head above water too. Like the night she ran away, I was so focused on work problems that I didn't notice she was picking up on my stress. What kind of father doesn't notice that his 6-year-old is worried enough to run away? The kind who's doing his best while dealing with impossible circumstances, Arya said firmly. You think your wife would have wanted you to stop living because she died? You think she would have wanted Emma to have a father who was so consumed with grief that he couldn't function? Jonathan looked at her with surprise. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Arya challenged gently. You talk about Sarah like she was perfect and you're failing to live up to her memory. But from what Emma tells me, Sarah would have wanted you both to be happy. She would have wanted you to have help when you needed it and to find joy in small things and to let other people care about you. Emma talks about her mother to you? Jonathan asked, looking both surprised and pleased. All the time, Arya said. She tells me about the songs Sarah used to sing and the way she made pancakes shaped like animals and how she always smelled like lavender soap. Emma's not trying to forget her mother, Jonathan. She's trying to honor her memory by living the kind of life Sarah would have wanted for her. Jonathan was quiet for a long time, watching Emma, who had now convinced 2 other children to help her create an elaborate story about the seagulls being secret zoo employees. What about your mother? He asked finally. Do you feel like you're honoring her memory? The question caught Arya off guard. She'd been so focused on helping Jonathan see his situation clearly that she hadn't expected him to turn the conversation back to her. I don't know, she said honestly. Some days I feel guilty for being happy, like I'm betraying her by moving on with my life. Other days I feel guilty for being sad, like I'm wasting the time she fought so hard to give me. What would she want for you? Jonathan asked, echoing her earlier words. Arya smiled, thinking of her mother's fierce determination and relentless optimism even in the face of terminal illness. She'd want me to go back to school. She'd want me to open that restaurant. She'd want me to stop being afraid of wanting things that might not work out. And what do you want? Jonathan asked, his voice soft. Arya looked at him, really looked at him. At the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he listened to Emma's elaborate stories with complete attention, the way he'd somehow made her feel like part of a family in just a few short weeks. Then she looked at Emma, who was now leading a group of children in what appeared to be a penguin parade. I want to stop being afraid, she said finally. I want to take chances on good things even if they scare me. Jonathan reached over and took her hand, lacing their fingers together in a way that felt both natural and electric. That sounds like a good plan. Daddy? Arya. Emma came running over, her cheeks flushed with excitement and exercise. The penguin keeper said I could help feed them. But I need a grown-up to come with me. Will you come? Both of you? Arya looked down at their joined hands, then up at Jonathan's face. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, but there was hope in it and warmth, and something that might have been the beginning of love. We'd love to, she said, standing up and pulling Jonathan with her. Lead the way, Emma. As they followed Emma toward the penguin exhibit, Jonathan squeezed her hand gently. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For helping me remember that Sarah would want us to be happy, he said. For helping me see that maybe it's okay to want things again. What kind of things? Arya asked, her heart beating a little faster. Jonathan stopped walking and turned to face her, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek gently. Things like this, he said softly. Things like you and Emma and me becoming something real. Something that honors the past but doesn't live in it. Before Arya could respond, Emma came running back to grab their hands and drag them toward the penguins. But as they walked, Arya felt something shift inside her chest, a wall she'd built around her heart starting to crumble, replaced by something that felt suspiciously like hope. Maybe Jonathan was right. Maybe it was possible to honor the people they'd lost while still being open to the people they'd found. Maybe love didn't have to be about replacing what was gone, but about building something new with the pieces that remained. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to find out what that looked like. November brought the first real snow of the season, and with it, a shift in the rhythm of Arya's life that she was still getting used to. 3 weeks had passed since the zoo, and somehow she'd become a regular fixture in the Pierce household without quite realizing how it had happened. It started small, Emma asking if Arya could help with a school project about community helpers since Arya worked with people every day. Then Jonathan mentioning that he was hopeless at helping with Emma's math homework and wondering if Arya might be better at explaining fractions. Before she knew it, Arya was spending most of her evenings after work at their house, helping with homework and staying for dinner and feeling more at home than she had anywhere since her mother died. Tonight was different though. Tonight was Emma's school Thanksgiving program, and somehow Arya had been invited like she was family. You don't have to come, Jonathan had said when Emma first mentioned it. I know it's probably just a bunch of 6-year-olds singing off-key songs about turkeys. That sounds perfect, Arya had replied and meant it. Now she was sitting in a too small plastic chair in Emma's school cafeteria, watching Emma stand on risers with 20 other first graders, wearing a construction paper pilgrim hat that was slightly crooked and singing about being thankful with complete seriousness. She's staring right at us, Jonathan whispered, leaning close enough that Arya could smell his cologne and feel the warmth of his arm against hers. She wants to make sure we're watching, Arya whispered back, waving at Emma, who broke character to wave back before remembering she was supposed to be a pilgrim. The program was exactly what Jonathan had predicted: off-key singing, forgotten words, and at least 3 kids who spent more time waving at their families than actually performing. It was also completely charming in the way that only children's performances could be. Afterward, as they waited in the lobby for Emma to return from putting away her costume, Arya found herself surrounded by other parents who clearly knew Jonathan but were curious about her. "Jonathan, you didn't tell us you were seeing someone," said a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of outfit that screamed expensive casual wear. "This is Arya," Jonathan said smoothly, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that felt protective. "Arya, this is Michelle Harper. Her daughter Sophia is in Emma's class." "It's so nice to meet you," Michelle said, her smile friendly but her eyes calculating. "How long have you two been together?" Arya felt her cheeks heat up. She and Jonathan had never actually defined what they were to each other. They spent time together, they held hands sometimes, there had been a few moments when she thought he might kiss her, but they'd never had the conversation about what any of it meant. "Arya is a very good friend," Jonathan said, and Arya tried not to feel disappointed by the careful way he said it. "That's wonderful," Michelle said. "Emma talks about you constantly. She told Sophia that you make the best chocolate cake in the world and that you know all the words to the princess songs." "Emma might be biased," Arya said with a laugh. "Children usually are," said another parent, a tall man who had appeared at Michelle's shoulder. "But they're also usually right about people. If Emma likes you, that's a pretty strong recommendation." Emma chose that moment to come running into the lobby, still wearing her pilgrim hat and practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you see me sing? Did you see the part where I remembered all the words? Mrs. Patterson said I was one of the best pilgrims she's ever had." "You were definitely the best pilgrim," Arya said, crouching down to Emma's level. "I've never seen anyone take being thankful so seriously." "I am thankful," Emma said solemnly. "I'm thankful for Daddy and for Mr. Hoppy and for chocolate cake and for you being my friend." The simple declaration hit Arya right in the chest. When was the last time someone had been genuinely thankful for her presence in their life? When was the last time she'd felt like she belonged somewhere the way she was starting to belong with Jonathan and Emma? "I'm thankful for you too, sweetheart," she said, and meant it more than Emma could possibly understand. As they walked to the parking lot, Emma chattering about the other kids' performances and planning what she wanted to be in the Christmas program, Jonathan fell into step beside Arya. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said quietly. It meant a lot to Emma. "And to me." "Thank you for inviting me," Arya replied. "I haven't been to a school program since I was the one performing in them." "Really? Your mom never went to school things?" "My mom worked 3 jobs when I was Emma's age," Arya said without bitterness. "She did the best she could, but things like school programs were luxuries we couldn't afford. She was usually working evenings." Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and Arya wondered if she'd said too much. It was easy to forget sometimes how different their backgrounds were, how many experiences she'd missed that he probably took for granted. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I shouldn't have assumed." "Don't apologize," Arya said quickly. "I didn't tell you to make you feel bad. I told you because this was special for me too. Being here, feeling like part of Emma's cheering section. It's not something I've had before." They'd reached Jonathan's car, where Emma was already buckled into her booster seat and showing Mr. Hoppy how to wear a pilgrim hat. "Arya," Jonathan said, turning to face her in the parking lot, "would you like to have Thanksgiving with us? I know it's short notice and you probably have plans." "I don't have plans," Arya said, trying not to sound as pathetic as that felt. "I usually just work. The diner's always busy on Thanksgiving, people who don't want to cook or don't have anywhere else to go." "Then don't work," Jonathan said simply. "Come have dinner with us instead. Emma's been asking if you could teach her how to make your chocolate cake, and I've been wanting to try my hand at cooking a turkey that doesn't come out dry as cardboard." Arya looked through the car window at Emma, who was now trying to put the pilgrim hat on Mr. Hoppy and explaining to the stuffed rabbit about the importance of being grateful. The sight made her heart feel too big for her chest. "I'd have to ask for the day off," she said. Thanksgiving is one of our busiest days. So ask, Jonathan said, stepping closer. Take a chance on something good, remember? It was her own words thrown back at her, and Arya found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Okay, she said. Yes. I'd love to have Thanksgiving with you both. Jonathan's answering smile was so bright it made her forget about the cold. Good, he said. Because Emma's already planned the menu. Apparently we're having turkey and mashed potatoes and green beans and stuffing and 3 different kinds of pie. 3 kinds of pie? Arya laughed. Who's making 3 kinds of pie? Well, Jonathan said with a sheepish grin, I was hoping you might help with that part. As they said goodbye in the parking lot, Emma rolling down her window to wave until they were out of sight, Arya realized that somewhere in the last month, without her quite noticing, her life had expanded to include things she'd never thought she could have. Family dinners and school programs and inside jokes and the kind of comfortable domesticity she'd only ever seen in movies. It should have terrified her. A month ago it would have terrified her. But standing in the parking lot with snow beginning to fall and the promise of Thanksgiving dinner warming her from the inside out, Arya found she wasn't scared at all. She was thankful. Thanksgiving morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made Portland feel like it was wrapped in a soft, damp blanket. Arya stood in her tiny kitchen at 5 a.m., surrounded by pie ingredients and trying not to think about how nervous she was. She'd made apple pie dozens of times, pumpkin was her mother's recipe that never failed, and the pecan pie was an experiment she hoped wouldn't be a disaster. But it wasn't really the pies that had her stomach in knots. It was the fact that she was about to spend her first real family holiday in 2 years, and she wasn't sure she remembered how to belong somewhere. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Emma's been awake since 6 asking when you're coming over. Fair warning, she's made you a pilgrim hat to match hers. The message made Arya smile despite her nerves. She texted back, tell her I'm honored. Pies will be ready in an hour. By the time she arrived at Jonathan's house at noon, carrying 3 pies and wearing the nervousness like an uncomfortable sweater, the kitchen was already in controlled chaos. Jonathan was standing at the stove, his hair slightly messy and his sleeves rolled up, stirring something that smelled amazing. Emma was sitting at the kitchen island, carefully mashing potatoes with a masher that was almost as big as she was. Arya! Emma shrieked, abandoning the potatoes to launch herself at Arya's legs. You're here. And you brought pies. And look. She pointed to her head, where she was indeed wearing a construction paper pilgrim hat identical to the one she'd worn for the school program. I made you one too. She held up a slightly lopsided pilgrim hat that had clearly been made with 6-year-old hands and a lot of love. Arya set down the pies and let Emma place the hat carefully on her head, adjusting it until it sat just right. How do I look? Arya asked seriously. Perfect, Emma declared. Now we're both pilgrims and we can be thankful together. That sounds like an excellent plan, Arya said, kissing the top of Emma's head and catching Jonathan's eye over his daughter's head. He was watching them with an expression that was soft and warm and something deeper than friendship. She's been working on that hat for 2 hours, he said, coming over to give Arya a hug that lasted just a moment longer than casual. I think it might be her masterpiece. It definitely is, Arya agreed, straightening Emma's hat. What can I do to help with dinner? You've already done enough with the pies, Jonathan said, but Arya was already rolling up her sleeves. Nonsense. This is a team effort. Emma, show me these potatoes you've been working on. The next few hours passed in a warm blur of cooking and laughter and the kind of easy domesticity that Arya had dreamed about but never experienced. Emma was a surprisingly good helper, carefully setting the table with the good china and folding napkins into shapes that were supposed to be turkeys but looked more like abstract art. Jonathan turned out to be a better cook than he'd given himself credit for, producing a golden turkey that smelled incredible and stuffing that actually looked like it belonged in a magazine. But more than the food, it was the way they moved around each other in the kitchen that felt like magic. Jonathan automatically handing Arya a spoon when she was looking for one, Arya knowing without being asked to keep Emma entertained while Jonathan dealt with the more complicated parts of the meal, all 3 of them falling into a rhythm that felt like they'd been doing this for years. Okay, Jonathan said finally, surveying the dining room table that was now loaded with more food than 3 people could possibly eat. I think we're ready. They sat down at the beautifully set table, Emma insisting that Arya sit next to her so they could compare pilgrim hats, and Jonathan at the head looking more relaxed than Arya had ever seen him. Before we eat, Emma announced solemnly, we have to say what we're thankful for. It's a rule. That's a good rule, Arya said. Who wants to go first? Me. Emma raised her hand like she was in school. I'm thankful for Daddy and for Mr. Hoppy and for this house and for chocolate cake and for making new friends and for pilgrims and for turkey, even though I don't really like turkey that much, but I like the stuffing." Jonathan laughed. "That's a very complete list, sweetheart. What about you, Arya?" Arya looked around the table at Emma in her crooked pilgrim hat, at Jonathan with his sleeves still rolled up and his hair still messy from cooking, at the abundance of food and warmth and belonging that filled this room, and felt her throat get tight with emotion. "I'm thankful for second chances," she said quietly. "For people who see the best in you even when you can't see it yourself. For feeling like I belong somewhere again." Jonathan reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing gently. "I'm thankful for the same things," he said. "And for a little girl who's brave enough to run away when she's scared, because it led us to someone who makes our family feel complete." Emma looked back and forth between them with the kind of knowing expression that 6-year-olds sometimes had. "Are you going to kiss now?" she asked matter-of-factly. "Because in movies when people say nice things like that they usually kiss." Both adults laughed and Arya felt her cheeks heat up. "Maybe after dinner," Jonathan said with a grin that made Arya's heart skip. "Okay," Emma said, apparently satisfied with this answer. "Can we eat now? I want to try all 3 pies." Dinner was everything Arya had hoped it would be and more. The food was delicious, the conversation was easy, and Emma kept them entertained with stories about the other kids in her class and elaborate theories about why turkeys couldn't fly very well. But more than any of that, it was the feeling of belonging that made Arya's chest feel warm and full. After they'd eaten far too much and Emma had indeed tried all 3 pies, declaring the pecan her favorite, which made Arya absurdly proud, they moved to the living room where Emma insisted on building a blanket fort while the adults cleaned up. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly as they loaded the dishwasher together. "This was exactly what we needed." "Thank you for including me," Arya replied. "I haven't had a real Thanksgiving since my mom died. I'd forgotten how good it could feel." "Arya," Jonathan said, turning to face her with an expression that was serious and hopeful at the same time. "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, Emma's voice came from the living room. "Daddy? Arya? Come see my fort. It's big enough for all of us." Jonathan smiled and shook his head. "Later," he said. "When we have more time to talk properly." They spent the rest of the evening in Emma's blanket fort, reading stories and playing board games and feeling like the kind of family Arya had always wanted but never thought she could have. When Emma finally fell asleep between them, her pilgrim hat askew and Mr. Hoppy clutched in her arms, Arya and Jonathan found themselves sitting in comfortable silence, watching the rise and fall of her small chest. "She's amazing," Arya whispered. "She is," Jonathan agreed. "And she adores you. I've never seen her attached to someone so quickly." "The feeling is mutual," Arya said softly. "I love her like she's my own." Jonathan turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made Arya's breath catch. "Arya," he said quietly, "what I was trying to tell you earlier, I'm falling in love with you. I know it's complicated and maybe too soon, but I needed you to know." Arya felt her heart stop, then start again at double speed. "Jonathan. You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand. That this isn't just about Emma needing a female figure in her life, or me needing help with parenting. This is about you, about the way you make me want to be better than I am, about the way you've become the first thing I think about in the morning and the last thing I think about at night." Arya looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully between them, then back at Jonathan's face. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much," she said honestly. "Of letting myself believe I can have this kind of life and then losing it. Of not being enough for either of you." Jonathan reached across Emma to touch Arya's face gently. "You're more than enough," he said firmly. "You're everything we didn't know we needed." And looking into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there and the love that was patient enough to wait for her to catch up, Arya felt the last of her walls crumble completely. "I love you too," she whispered and meant it with her whole heart. The call came at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday in December, jarring Arya awake from dreams of Christmas shopping and ice skating with Emma. She fumbled for her phone, her heart already racing with the kind of panic that came from middle-of-the-night calls. "Arya?" Jonathan's voice was tight with stress and exhaustion. "I'm sorry to wake you, but Emma's in the hospital." Arya was already sitting up, reaching for clothes. "What happened? Is she okay?" "She spiked a fever tonight and when it hit 104, I brought her to the ER. They think it's pneumonia. She's stable but..." His voice broke slightly. "She's asking for you." "I'm on my way," Arya said, already pulling on jeans. "Which hospital?" "Asu." Pediatric Ward, Room 318. Arya, you don't have to. I'm coming, she said firmly, and hung up before he could try to talk her out of it. The drive to the hospital felt endless, Portland's empty streets stretching out under yellow streetlights while Arya's mind raced with worry. Emma had seemed fine when Arya saw her 3 days ago, happy and energetic and excited about the Christmas tree they'd planned to pick out this weekend. How could she be sick enough for the hospital so quickly? She found Jonathan in the hallway outside Emma's room, slumped in an uncomfortable plastic chair with his head in his hands. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually neat hair disheveled and his clothes wrinkled like he'd thrown them on in a hurry. "Jonathan," she said softly, and he looked up with relief so naked it made her chest ache. "You came," he said, standing to wrap her in a hug that felt like he was holding on for dear life. "Of course I came," she said into his shoulder. "How is she?" "Better than she was a few hours ago," he said, pulling back to look at her. "Her fever's down to 101, and the antibiotics seem to be helping. But she looks so small in that hospital bed, and she keeps asking why her chest hurts, and I don't know how to make it better." "You're making it better by being here," Arya said firmly. "Can I see her?" Emma was awake when they walked into the room, propped up against a pile of pillows and looking pale but alert. Mr. Hoppy was tucked under one arm, and there were get well cards scattered across the bedside table that must have been from her classmates. "Arya." Emma's voice was hoarse but happy. "You came to visit me in the hospital." "I heard you weren't feeling well," Arya said, pulling a chair up next to the bed and taking Emma's small hand in hers. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" "My chest feels funny and the breathing machine is loud, but the nurses are really nice and they gave me ice chips that taste like cherry," Emma said. "And Daddy's been here all night even though the chair looks really uncomfortable." "That's what daddies do when their little girls are sick," Arya said, brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead. "They stay close to make sure you're okay." "Will you stay too?" Emma asked, her eyes wide and hopeful. "Just until I fall asleep again? The medicine makes me sleepy but I don't want to have scary dreams." Arya looked at Jonathan, who nodded gratefully. "Of course I'll stay," she said. "Do you want me to tell you a story?" "Yes. Tell me the one about the princess who could talk to animals. But make it a Christmas story this time." So Arya spent the next hour making up an elaborate tale about a princess who helped all the forest animals prepare for Christmas, while Emma's breathing gradually deepened and her eyes grew heavy. Jonathan sat on the other side of the bed, holding Emma's other hand and looking like he was trying not to fall apart. When Emma finally fell asleep, they moved out to the hallway so they wouldn't wake her. "Thank you," Jonathan said quietly. "She's been restless all night, but she settled down as soon as you got here." "She's going to be fine," Arya said, though she could see the fear in his eyes. "Kids get pneumonia all the time and she's strong and healthy otherwise." "I know," Jonathan said, rubbing his face tiredly. "But when her fever spiked tonight, all I could think about was Sarah. About how fast things went downhill with her, how helpless I felt watching her get sicker while the doctors tried treatment after treatment." "This is different," Arya said firmly. "Emma is not Sarah. This is pneumonia, not cancer, and she's going to recover completely." "I know that logically," Jonathan said. "But sitting in that room watching her struggle to breathe, I felt like I was drowning again. Like I was failing her the same way I failed Sarah." "You didn't fail Sarah," Arya said, taking his hands in hers. "And you're not failing Emma. You got her to the hospital as soon as you realized how sick she was. You've been by her side all night. You're being exactly the father she needs." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, looking through the window at Emma sleeping peacefully in her hospital bed. "I'm scared, Arya," he said finally. "I'm scared of losing her. I'm scared of losing you. I'm scared that letting myself love again means opening myself up to the kind of loss I don't think I could survive twice." Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe I was wrong to let this happen," Jonathan said, not looking at her. "Maybe I was being selfish, thinking I could have a normal life again. Maybe Emma and I are too complicated, too damaged for someone like you to take on." "Someone like me?" Arya's voice was sharper than she'd intended. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Someone with her whole life ahead of her," Jonathan said tiredly. "Someone who deserves better than a widower with a sick kid and more baggage than anyone should have to carry." The words hit Arya like a physical blow. After months of feeling like she belonged, like she was part of something real and lasting, Jonathan was pulling away the moment things got difficult. "So that's it," she said, trying to keep her voice down even though she wanted to shout. "The first time something scary happens, you decide I'm too young and inexperienced to handle it? You decide for me what I can and can't take on. Arya, that's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, she said, standing up from the uncomfortable hospital chair. You're scared, so you're pushing me away before I can decide to leave on my own. Well, congratulations, Jonathan. You've just proved that you trust me even less than I thought you did. That's not fair, Jonathan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Arya asked. I've been here every day for 3 months. I've helped with homework and school projects and bedtime stories. I've fallen in love with your daughter and with you, and I've made myself part of your lives in every way I know how. But the moment Emma gets sick, you decide I'm not strong enough to handle the hard parts of being a family. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Arya said, her voice quiet now but filled with hurt. I understand that you don't really see me as an equal partner in this. You see me as someone who's nice to have around when things are easy but who can't be trusted when things get real. She looked through the window at Emma, who was sleeping soundly now, her breathing easier and her color better than it had been when Arya first arrived. The sight of the little girl she'd come to love like her own daughter made her chest feel tight with grief. I love that little girl in there more than I've ever loved anyone, she said quietly. And I love you even though right now I'm furious with you. But I can't be with someone who doesn't trust me enough to let me choose what I can handle. I can't be with someone who thinks so little of me that he assumes I'll run at the first sign of trouble. Arya, please? No, she said, holding up her hand. You've made your position clear. You think I'm too young and too inexperienced and too fragile for your real life. So I'll go back to my simple little world and you can handle this on your own, since that's apparently what you think is best. She started to walk away, then turned back. But Jonathan? When Emma wakes up and asks where I am, don't you dare tell her I left because I couldn't handle her being sick. Tell her I left because her father doesn't trust me enough to let me stay. Arya made it all the way to her car before she started crying. She sat in the hospital parking garage, surrounded by concrete and fluorescent lights, and sobbed for the family she'd thought she was building and the love she'd thought was strong enough to weather anything. She'd been wrong before about being ready to take chances on good things. But she'd never been wrong about this. She was strong enough to handle whatever came with loving Jonathan and Emma. She just wasn't strong enough to be with someone who didn't believe in her strength. So she drove home through the empty streets, her heart breaking with every mile, and tried to figure out how to go back to a life that suddenly felt impossibly small and lonely. Emma was released from the hospital 2 days later, and by the weekend she was back to her usual energetic self, asking when Arya was coming over and why Daddy looked so sad all the time. Jonathan had no idea how to answer either question. He tried calling Arya 3 times since their fight in the hospital, but she hadn't answered. He'd stopped by the diner twice, but Dolores had informed him with icy politeness that Arya was taking some personal time and wasn't available. The message was clear: he wasn't welcome. Daddy, Emma said on Saturday morning, looking up from her cereal with the kind of serious expression that usually meant trouble, did you and Arya have a fight? Jonathan paused in the middle of pouring coffee and looked at his daughter. Emma might only be 6, but she'd always been perceptive beyond her years. There was no point in trying to lie to her. Yes, he said simply. We had a disagreement. About what? Emma asked, stirring her cereal thoughtfully. How did you explain to a 6-year-old that you'd sabotage the best thing in your life because you were terrified of losing it? How did you tell your daughter that you'd pushed away the woman you both loved because you thought it was better to end things on your terms than risk having them end on someone else's? About grown-up things, Jonathan said finally. Emma considered this for a moment. Was it because I got sick? The question hit Jonathan like a punch to the chest. Why would you think that? Because Arya was there when I was in the hospital, and then she wasn't there anymore, and now you look sad the same way you looked when Mommy got sick, Emma said matter-of-factly. I thought maybe she got scared because I might die like Mommy did. Jonathan sat down heavily at the kitchen table, his coffee forgotten. Emma, sweetheart, you're not going to die. You had pneumonia, which is different from what Mommy had. The doctors gave you medicine and you got better. I know that, Emma said patiently. But maybe Arya didn't know that. Maybe she got scared and you told her it was okay to be scared and that's why she's not coming over anymore. The simplicity of Emma's logic made Jonathan realize how badly he'd misunderstood everything. Arya hadn't been scared of Emma being sick, she'd been hurt that he didn't trust her to stick around through the difficult times. She'd been angry that he'd made decisions for her instead of letting her make them herself. What if I told you that Arya wasn't scared at all? Jonathan said carefully. What if I told you that Daddy was the one who was scared and I said some things that hurt Arya's feelings? Emma's eyes went wide. You hurt Arya's feelings? But she's the nicest person ever. I know, Jonathan said miserably. I made a big mistake. Did you say you're sorry? Emma asked as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. I tried to, but Arya doesn't want to talk to me right now. Emma considered this seriously. When I hurt someone's feelings at school, Mrs. Patterson says I have to do more than just say sorry. I have to show that I'm sorry by doing something nice. What kind of something nice? Jonathan asked, genuinely curious about 6-year-old wisdom. Well, Emma said thoughtfully, you could make her a card. Or you could give her flowers. Or you could. She paused, her face lighting up with inspiration. You could help her with something important. Something that shows you believe in her. Jonathan stared at his daughter, amazed by how perfectly she'd identified the core of the problem. He hadn't just hurt Arya's feelings, he'd made her feel like he didn't believe in her, didn't trust her judgment or her strength. If he wanted to fix this, he needed to do more than apologize. He needed to show her that he saw her as the capable, strong, amazing woman she was. Emma, he said slowly, what do you know about Arya's dreams? About what she wants to do with her life. She wants to open a restaurant, Emma said immediately. She told me about it when we were making cookies. She wants to make healthy food that tastes really good, and she wants to help people feel better when they eat it. Like how Mommy's chicken soup always made me feel better when I was sad. An idea was beginning to form in Jonathan's mind, an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. Emma, how would you feel if we helped Arya make her dream come true? Like opening a restaurant? Emma's eyes went wide with excitement. Could we really do that? Maybe, Jonathan said, his mind already racing with possibilities. But it would mean working really hard to show Arya that we believe in her. That we know she's strong enough to handle anything. I want to help, Emma said, bouncing in her chair. What do we need to do? Jonathan spent the next hour on the phone while Emma drew pictures of what she thought Arya's restaurant should look like, lots of flowers and a special table just for kids. By noon, he had appointments with a commercial real estate agent, a business loan officer, and a restaurant consultant who specialized in helping new establishments get off the ground. It was crazy and it was probably presumptuous, and there was a very good chance that Arya would be furious with him for going behind her back. But it was also the only way he could think of to show her that he didn't see her as someone who needed protection from the difficult parts of life. He saw her as someone capable of building her own dreams, with support from people who loved her. Daddy, Emma said as they got ready to leave for their first appointment, what if Arya is still mad at us even after we help her with the restaurant? It was a possibility Jonathan didn't want to consider, but he owed Emma an honest answer. Then at least we'll know we tried to make things right, he said. And Arya will have her restaurant, which she deserves whether she forgives us or not. Emma nodded solemnly. That's good. Because even if she's mad at you, she shouldn't be mad at her dreams. As they drove across town to meet with the real estate agent, Jonathan found himself thinking about Sarah and what she would have said about all this. She would have told him he was an idiot for pushing Arya away in the first place, but she also would have been proud of him for trying to fix it. Sarah had always believed that love meant supporting each other's dreams, not trying to protect each other from life. Maybe it wasn't too late to show Arya that he'd learned that lesson. Maybe it wasn't too late to prove that he trusted her strength, her judgment, and her ability to choose what was right for her own life. And maybe, if he was very lucky, she'd give him the chance to spend the rest of his life showing her just how much he believed in her. 3 weeks before Christmas, Arya was working the breakfast shift at Murphy's when Dolores appeared at her elbow with a cup of coffee and a knowing look. You've got visitors, Dolores said, nodding toward the front door where Jonathan and Emma were standing, both looking nervous and determined. Arya felt her heart jump, then tried to calm it down. She'd been expecting this. Emma's Christmas program was next week, and she'd been hoping Jonathan might bring her by to invite her. Not that she was planning to go. Not that she'd been thinking about it every day since Emma had been released from the hospital. I'm working, Arya said, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. You're all so miserable, Dolores said bluntly. And they look like they've got something important to say. At least hear them out. Before Arya could protest, Emma had spotted her and was practically dragging her father across the diner. She was wearing a red Christmas dress and had a large envelope clutched in her mittened hands. Arya, Emma said, stopping in front of the counter with the kind of breathless excitement that only 6-year-olds could achieve. We have something for you. It's really important and Daddy says it might change your whole life. Arya looked from Emma to Jonathan, who was standing slightly behind his daughter with an expression that was equal parts hopeful and terrified. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping well, and there were lines around his eyes that she didn't remember being there before. Emma, he said gently, remember what we talked about? Arya might not want to see us right now. But we have to give her the present. Emma insisted. It's not a Christmas present, it's an apology present. And it's too important to mail. Despite herself, Arya was curious. She looked around the diner. It was the lull between breakfast and lunch, with only a few tables occupied, and Dolores was already waving her away from the counter. 5 minutes, she said firmly. And then you both need to leave so I can work. Jonathan nodded gratefully and followed her to an empty booth in the back corner. Emma climbed up on the seat next to Arya, the mysterious envelope still clutched in her hands. Before you open it, Jonathan said quietly, I need to apologize. What I said at the hospital was wrong. I was scared and I took that fear out on you, and I'm sorry. You deserved better from me. You hurt my feelings, Arya said simply, looking at Emma rather than at him. It was easier to be honest when she wasn't looking into those brown eyes that still made her heart race. I know, Jonathan said. And I want to spend the rest of my life making up for it if you'll let me. Daddy was really sad after you left, Emma said matter-of-factly. He kept cooking dinner for 3 people and then remembering you weren't coming. And he stared at your pictures on his phone a lot. Emma, Jonathan said, his cheeks reddening slightly. It's true. Emma protested. And you talked to Mommy's picture about how you messed up something good because you were scared. I heard you. Arya felt something tighten in her chest. She looked at Jonathan, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his face, the regret and the love and the fear that he might have ruined everything beyond repair. Open the envelope, Emma said urgently, pushing it into Arya's hands. It's the best apology present ever. With trembling fingers, Arya opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. The first page made her breath catch. It was a lease agreement for a restaurant space downtown, already signed and paid for 6 months in advance. What is this? She whispered, flipping through the pages in shock. It's everything you need to open your restaurant, Jonathan said quietly. The lease, permits, a meeting scheduled with a loan officer who specializes in small business startups, contact information for restaurant suppliers, even a suggested menu based on the healthy comfort food concept you told Emma about. Arya stared at the papers, her mind reeling. This wasn't just a generous gift, this was someone who had listened to her dreams and taken them seriously enough to make them possible. I can't accept this, she said automatically. This is too much. It's not a gift, Jonathan said quickly. It's an investment. I want to be a silent partner in your restaurant if you'll have me. I believe in your vision, Arya. I believe in you. We both do, Emma added solemnly. I already drew pictures of what the restaurant should look like. There's going to be a kids' corner with coloring books and healthy mac and cheese and chocolate cake for special occasions. Arya looked through the papers again, seeing months of work and planning and genuine belief in her abilities. This wasn't someone trying to buy her forgiveness, this was someone showing her that he saw her as capable and strong and worthy of having her dreams supported. Why? She asked, her voice barely audible. Because I was wrong, Jonathan said simply. I was wrong to think you couldn't handle the hard parts of loving us. I was wrong to try to protect you from choices that should have been yours to make. And I was wrong to let my fear keep me from supporting your dreams the way you've supported ours. And because we love you, Emma added, leaning against Arya's arm. Even when Daddy was being silly and scared, we still loved you. We just forgot how to show it right. Arya felt tears prick at her eyes. She looked at the lease agreement again, then at Emma's hopeful face, then finally at Jonathan, who was waiting for her response like his whole world depended on it. This is crazy, she said finally. Completely crazy, Jonathan agreed. But good crazy, I hope. The location is perfect, Arya said, reading through the details. And the terms are more than fair. How did you even know what I'd want? Emma helped, Jonathan said with a small smile. She remembers everything you've ever told her about your restaurant dreams. Apparently you've been planning this longer than either of us realized. Arya looked at Emma, who was practically vibrating with excitement. You really helped Daddy with all this? I was the creative consultant, Emma said proudly. Daddy did the boring grown-up stuff, but I made sure he remembered about the kids' corner and the healthy desserts and the special table by the window for people who want to eat alone but don't want to feel lonely. The detail hit Arya right in the heart. Emma had understood something about her restaurant vision that Arya had never articulated, that it would be a place where people could find comfort and community, whether they came alone or with family. There's one more thing, Jonathan said, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small velvet box. Arya's heart stopped. Jonathan. It's not what you think, he said quickly, though his cheeks were red and his hands were shaking slightly. I mean, it is what you think, but not right now. Not until you're ready. He opened the box to reveal a simple, beautiful engagement ring, not flashy or ostentatious, but classic and elegant and absolutely perfect. "This is a promise," he said quietly. "A promise that when you're ready, when the restaurant is up and running and you've had time to forgive me for being an idiot, I want to ask you to marry us. Both of us. To make this family official. Both of us." Arya asked, looking at Emma, who was nodding enthusiastically. "I helped pick out the ring too," Emma said proudly. "Daddy said it should be something Mommy would have liked because she would have loved you and wanted you to be part of our family." Arya felt the tears overflow then, running down her cheeks as she looked at this man and this little girl who had somehow become her whole world. She thought about the months of feeling like she belonged somewhere, the way Jonathan made her feel capable and loved, the way Emma had filled a hole in her heart she didn't even know existed. "Yes," she said quietly. "Yes to the restaurant?" Jonathan asked, hope blooming in his voice. "Yes to all of it," Arya said, reaching out to take both their hands. "Yes to the restaurant, yes to the partnership, yes to the promise of someday. Yes to this crazy, wonderful, complicated family we've built together." Emma launched herself into Arya's arms with a squeal of delight, and Jonathan leaned across the table to kiss her forehead gently. "I love you," he said quietly. "Both of you. And I promise I'll never try to protect you from your own choices again." "Good," Arya said, holding Emma close and looking into Jonathan's eyes. "Because I choose this. I choose you and Emma and the restaurant and whatever comes next. All of it." "Even when it's scary?" Jonathan asked. "Especially when it's scary," Arya said firmly. "Because the best things in life are always a little scary. And we're brave enough to handle whatever comes next." As they sat in the booth at Murphy's Diner, holding hands and making plans for a restaurant and a wedding and a future that was bright with possibility, Arya realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories weren't about finding someone perfect. They were about finding someone who was perfectly imperfect for you, someone who would support your dreams and let you support theirs, someone who would choose to be brave with you even when the world felt uncertain. And looking at Jonathan and Emma, her heart full of love and hope and the promise of new beginnings, Arya knew she'd found exactly that. 6 months later, when Arya's kitchen opened its doors for the first time, the first customers through the door were a man in a well-tailored suit carrying a little girl who insisted on personally welcoming everyone to our restaurant. And when the local food critic called it, "a place where healthy comfort food meets genuine hospitality," Arya knew that sometimes the best dreams were the ones you built with people who loved you enough to believe in them too. Thank you for joining Arya, Jonathan, and Emma on their journey to finding love and family in unexpected places. Their story reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful relationships grow from simple acts of kindness like sharing a sandwich with a scared little girl on a cold night. We'd love to hear from you. What moment in this story touched your heart the most? Have you ever experienced a chance encounter that changed your life? Do you think Arya and Jonathan were right to take things slowly, or would you have made different choices in their situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives make our community richer and help us create even better stories for you to enjoy.